Professor Jesse Turner, who's joining us tonight.
Good evening, everyone. And Mr. Turner coming down. It's easy to do, but I did find my way. It's interesting that I'll touch upon 3 points. I'll touch a little bit about how the Fed's reforms have been failures. And historically, they've always been failures. And there's data to prove that. I'll talk about data a little bit. I look at data and say there's data that counts and there's data that really counts. So to give you a quick example, data that counts, maybe it is this mastery score because they won't leave your child behind, they won't implement some punitive measure. But the data that really counts is the one where the teacher came home, the child came home and said, I read my first chapter book. I smiled at my first book. I created my first project. I accomplished something. I laughed today. They tell you a funny story in school. They enjoyed their math lesson for change. There's other data that we're not counting. The data that says that I learned about a great person in history today. I don't know, maybe it's Thomas Jefferson, maybe it's Dr. King. Who is it? They learned about a great person and they shared it with you and they said, I want to be like that person. That's data. That's the data we're not looking at. The creative and innovative side and the moral side and the ethical side of education, we've thrown that out. What are we reducing our children to test scores? So that piece, I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'm hoping, you know, this is what democracy looks like. We know it. I think in the White House, I think our Congress, I think our Senate, I think our legislators, I forgot what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. And they need to be talking to parents, they need to be talking to children, they need to be talking to teachers, they need to be talking to the people. If they did, we wouldn't be in the predicament we're in now. So, and then I'll say that I'm going to ask, I don't know, maybe some of you will join us. We have a press conference at the Capitol tomorrow. We decided we can't take enough of this, and we're going to propose a bill that called Ethan's Law that gives parents the absolute right to opt out. We want it publicly stated, because my parents are coming back to me and telling me that I've gone through the stuff, like you said, the letter, and they're coming back and they're saying, I went 3 times, I said no, I wrote the letter, then I met with them, then they gave me this other letter back, and it made me feel, I walked out feeling frustrated, bullied, and I felt like I was breaking the law, like I was doing something wrong, and all I was doing was protecting my child. So I'll end with how you can do that piece. So one, how's the federal government failing? Well, we've had impact studies. So we begin with No Child Left Behind, allocated $1.2 trillion. That's a massive amount of money. It was the largest allocation for education ever. And I'm wondering where it was spent. Because we have 300,000 less teachers in our classroom. So if our classroom sizes are growing, teachers are more frustrated, kids are more frustrated, somehow we spent it somewhere, and I don't know where it is. We've got we could have done it, we could have paid for the education of every college student in the nation if they gave us 20 hours a week at our schools, tutoring our kids. We could have hired an army of tutors. We could have hired an army of math and reading specialists. We could have reduced our class size. We could do other things. We could have had summer camps for learning. We could have had Saturday school. We could have done so many other things. But that's a lot of money. It's only 10%. But the federal government, so here they proposed this, they made a promise in 2001, and when the law was passed in 2002, their promise to us was that on December 31st, 2013, that every child in this nation would be reading, writing, and doing math at grade level. Well, the data's in. Either they lied or they failed. We already have the data. And they spent this massive amount of money on this point. So I'm one of those people that from the very beginning, because I look at education reform historically, and if you emphasize more testing, guess what? You have more failure. You have more identified kids that start looking like special ed kids, that become emotional problems, that become behavioral issues. You have more dropouts. This is what happens. You have 19 states in America who have adopted high school graduation tests. Guess what? Those 19 states have had increases in dropouts. I mean, we need to look at the data. So when I say the data that counts and the data that really counts, I don't know who's in Washington, but they're not looking at the data that really counts. Second of all, we had Reading First. Reading First was the government's attempt to say, we know how to fix every reading problem and math problem in America. And what they did, they chose what they decided were the 5 best reading programs that they could find out there. They packaged them, they created Reading First schools, and they gave them money, they supported them, they hired staff, they bought their curriculums, and what they did was they had this, and it went on for 6 years, and it cost billions of dollars. And at the end of those 6 years, just as George Bush was leaving, and Barack Obama should have known it, because with Bush it came the first early release. When President Obama came in, he had the final release of the impact studies. And the first grade reading impact study said this, that our third graders could identify letters and isolated skills, but they comprehended less. And who did they comprehend less with? Because there was one other group in there. So if you had one of those 5 programs and you were one of those schools and you did this thing for the 6 years they did it, it's a long time. And the impact study looked at this, and the other group was a school they did nothing different with. And guess what? Their third graders were the only third graders that showed improvements in comprehension. So I say, well, they shouldn't be chasing our data. I want to knock on the White House door. Actually, I did. I walked 400 miles in 40 days in 2010 to Washington, D.C. from Central Connecticut State University. I was 50 pounds heavier. I had to lose a lot of weight. I had to get in shape. I'm a guy that likes my Burger King stuff. And I walked to D.C. over there to protest that piece. Over there, the emphasis on high-stakes assessment in our nation. And what happens? Nobody really paid attention.